Today we're making flying geese units and turning them into a zippered pouch. It's part of the How to Quilt series. You can get a link to the written directions down in the description. Let's get started. We're going to make our flying geese using the no-waste method. I'm going to show you now what each step looks like, but if you'd like to watch a step-by-step video on it, we have a link to that down in our description. When you make a flying geese unit using the no-waste method, you have a larger square for the goose fabric, and then you have 4 smaller squares for the sky fabric. So I have my sky fabric, and I'm going to take and I'm going to mark that center on the diagonal. I'm going to do that for all of them. Then with 2 of the smaller squares, I'm going to take them and put them with the larger square right sides together so that that line completely goes across the large square on the diagonal. They're going to do a little overlap right there, and then I'd pin right here, and then I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch from either side of that marked line. So let me show you what that looks like all sewn. Here's the next step. Once it's all sewn, you can see there, we are just going to take, line our ruler up over that marked line again, and cut it apart. And that gives us 2 sides, and whenever we pull those up, we see that it almost looks like a little fox head. That's going to be our next step. I've pressed the sky fabric away from the goose fabric. That's going to be helpful later. And then I'm going to take another of my marked squares, and I'm going to line it up along that corner of the goose fabric so that the marked line goes right in between the 2 sky points. And then I'm going to sew a 1/4 inch down either side. And I'm especially going to make sure whenever I get to that top that my seam goes right through that intersection where the fabrics meet. Once you've sewn those, you're going to cut them apart. You're going to go ahead and repeat that for the other fox fabric, but I'm going to jump ahead and just show you that we're also going to press that sky fabric away from the goose fabric, and that gives us a flying geese unit. Now that we've made 4 flying geese units, we're going to turn them into a sawtooth star. This is a super common block in quilting. You're going to see it everywhere. You're going to see tons of variations on it. So I wanted to just go ahead and make one today. To do this, we're going to need our 4 flying geese. We're going to need 4 squares. They're the same color as our goose fabrics. And we're going to need a center square for that middle. So I have all those. And we're going to construct it just like a 9 patch. It's 3 rows of 3 units. I'm going to take 2 of my background squares, sew them to either side of the flying geese. I'm going to take 2 flying geese, sew them to either side of that center square. And I'm going to repeat the exact same row that I did on top. And then we're going to sew those rows together. Here I have my block almost all put together. I have 1 row left to go on, but I wanted to show you what I did with the pressing. On this center row, I've pressed my seams in towards the center block. I've done this because it helps preserve those star points and because it's going to give us a much flatter block and allow us to lock seams. So see here on these outer rows, I have pressed out towards those background squares. This is going to make our seams go in opposite directions. It's going to let us lock, and like I said, flatter block, which is going to be really helpful as we're sewing over all these different points. I'm ready to sew. I've got my needle in the down position. This is going to help me as I have to stop and make adjustments. All right, let's start sewing. And as I get past that seam, I put my needle down and I can lift, and I see that those have totally locked. They're right on each other. So that spot is all good. My next tricky spot is down here where the flying geese point is. As we're sewing over that, I want to make sure I'm not sewing to the flying geese side or right across that X. I want to sew just to the inside in the seam allowance. So I'm going to get all lined up and start sewing. Making sure that seam feels like it's locked. I'm ready to press my block. I'm going to, again, as we always do, by setting my seam. Then I'm going to take and I'm going to press in towards my center square. I like to do that with these sawtooth stars because if I press the other direction, I'd probably really distort the point on my flying geese unit, and I don't want to do that. So I'm going to press towards that center square, and I'm just going to do it gently out here on the pretty side, just to make sure I don't have any fabric folded under. Sometimes those little points are finicky, so I just give them a little extra attention. And then flip it over to the back side. Do a slightly longer press at those star points because all that bulk sometimes just takes a little extra heat and time. We're ready to start assembling our pouch, but before I do, I'm going to install a zipper foot on my sewing machine. This is a foot that has a little divot in the side that leaves room for our zipper as we sew over it. It's really handy with this kind of project. So I'm removing my 1/4 inch foot and I am snapping on my zipper foot. Zipper foots are interesting because they usually have one side or the other that you can sew from. So just pick a side and we'll get going. We're ready to start assembling our zippered pouch. I have the star unit for the outside of one side. I have a square that's the exact same size as the block for the lining. I have a zipper, either 9 or 14 inches, whatever you prefer. And I've got a bunch of little wonder clips here. So let's get started with it. I'm going to take my zipper and I'm going to lay it with it closed, right sides together with my block. And then I'm going to take the lining piece. I'm going to have the right side, put it against the zipper. And I'm going to line all of that up. The lining and the block are the same size. I'm just going to make sure they're even to each other all the way around. Then I'm going to bring my little clips. Again, just making sure all that's kind of lined up there at the edge. I'm going to clip the piece. And I don't need tons of clips, but enough to make me feel secure, enough to make sure that everything is held well. I have my little sandwich under the sewing machine. I have the bulk of my zipper to the left of the needle and my zipper foot oriented mostly to the right of the needle. This means that my zipper foot is not right on top of that zipper. My needle isn't going to go through the zipper. We're just going through that little fabric part to the side. We're going to be sewing an approximate 1/4 inch. And before we get started, I wanted you to see I've got my pull down at the end. We're going to be moving that part of the way through the seam, and I'll walk you through that step as we get to it. So let's start sewing. As I get to that first clip, I'm going to take it out, making sure all my layers are still even. Same thing there. And then as I've gotten down here to the end where my little zipper pull is, I've got my needle down. I'm going to go ahead and lift my presser foot. This gives me a little bit more room to work and move that zipper pull like I talked about. So see, I've got it down here at the end and I'm going to take and unzip it past where I've already sewn. Then I'm going to line everything back up again. And sew right to the end of the line. We've sewn the first side of our bag. Let's take a look at how it went. I'm going to open up my layers. You can zip that guy back up. And we can see I've got my front, I've got my lining, and whenever I sandwich them together, we have one side all done. We're ready to do the exact same thing on the other side. We're ready to lay out the second side. I'm going to take the side we've already sewn. I've got both my lining and my outer part kind of held together there. And I'm going to take it, I'm going to put it right sides together with the other block. And remember that if our center square has a directional print, we want to make sure that the zipper is going at the top of our block. So I'm laying those together. And with this step, I want to make sure my sides are even. So as I'm lining up the zipper, I'm also making sure that the sides of my two blocks all line up evenly. So I've got that lined up, and then I'm going to bring my lining in, again, right sides over the zipper, and getting that. And then I'm going to pin, just like we did last time. Now that we have the second side done, we can open up and see how we did. It's beautiful. I've got both my stars on either side, lining on either side, our lovely zipper down the middle, which means we're ready to trim the zipper. I've got a pair of paper scissors for this. Even though there's no metal in my zipper, I still don't want to use my fabric scissors on it. So I've just got a pair of paper scissors. I'm going to line it up just to that edge, go right through it, and we're all trimmed and ready to sew the entire zipper pouch together now. Before we start laying this out, I'm going to unzip halfway. This is going to make it a little easier as we turn the bag later. Then I'm going to take my two stars. I'm going to bring them right sides together. And we're going to also bring our two linings right sides together. So see, I've got the zipper there in the center. I've got my stars all to one side and my linings all to one side. And all of them are facing each other. I'm going to line all the edges and use my clips, or you can use some pins, either one's fine. I'm just making sure everything is matching around the sides. Doing that for the lining. At the zipper, I want to push the excess towards the lining and then just go ahead and clip that. That'll help as we sew. And that's going to help us as we're using the bag later. I'm going to do that on both ends. And once we have it all clipped, we're ready to sew. I've put my 1/4 inch foot back on and I'm ready to sew. I'm starting a few inches away from the corner in the lining. That's going to leave us a gap in the bottom of the lining as we finish. So let's get started. We're going to start sewing. Taking out that clip. On these corners, I'm just going to sew right through. And then I'm going to lift and turn. Start sewing the same way. As I'm coming to that zipper, I'm going to take my pin out and I'm holding that orientation with my fingers so that it's all set. And I'm just going to take it nice and slow through here. There's a fair amount of bulk right there. So I'm getting it under my foot slowly. All right, and I've sewn through that. Make sure everything's aligned again and start sewing. As I'm coming up to these points, I'm just going to take it a little slow. Again, we've got some extra bulk because we're sewing through 2 layers of those in our stars. You can kind of see down here, my ends have ended up just a little wonky. Luckily, because this is a lining in a zipper pouch, I'm not too worried about that. So I'm just going to treat the shorter layer like it's the correct size. So I'm sewing all the way down. And doing our last little turn. And I'm just going to sew in about as much as I did whenever we started, just a few inches. This is going to leave me that opening. All right, got enough room for my hand to go through there. Before we turn this, I just want to show you why it was so important that we had that zipper halfway undone as we sew all the layers together. As we're turning, if that zipper was closed, we wouldn't be able to reach all the way through the stars, and we'd have to try to like work the pull from the outside, and that's just a real challenge. So I've got my zipper open, I'm able to reach all the way to the back of this, and we're just gonna start turning. Getting it all turned out. And it's okay if you wanna keep the lining separate, but we'll stick it in its right place in a moment. So I'm just kind of gently pushing with my fingers at the corners, long seam lines, just like we've done other times when we turn things, like when we turned our pillow, when we turned our coasters. Okay. Do that for the lining. All right, and then I'm able to unzip all the way. That gives me a little room to pull my lining out and get it even. This is a really easy closing that we're going to do on this zippered pouch. Because it's a zippered pouch and this is going to be at the bottom of the bag, I'm not really worried about making it pretty. So I like to just take and if you just kind of pull taut at both ends, usually the fabric will already tuck itself in, so you get a finished little edge there. And then you can take and you can set that with an iron. Got that open end, going to set it to make a little crease. It's just easier as we sew. I've got it under my machine. We're just gonna sew that hole closed. There we go. I'm just catching a little bit, not even like a full eighth. Going all the way down that opening, kind of tapering off at the end. I'm going to trim the threads, and once I get those all trimmed, I'm ready to take and tuck the lining back into the zippered pouch. And there we go. And now you've made a zippered pouch. I hope you've had fun making this project. If you'd like to ask questions or show off what you've made, you can join our How to Quilt Facebook page. We have a link down in the description. And as always, thanks for watching. Look good?